Hi, my name is Desmond. Today I want to answer the question, should I buy a new camera? Well, if you're a beginner, the answer is no. I'll tell you why. If you're an intermediate photographer, you've already got a camera. If you have to ask, the answer is probably still no. Because what's your current camera not doing that you need it to do? Are you just trying to get someone to convince you to buy a camera? The main three reasons I can think of upgrading is better high ISO performance, because if you've got a really old camera and it only does ISO 800 or 1600, then modern cameras can make things a lot better for you. Otherwise, if you're into sports photography, better autofocus performance and a higher frame rate. That's probably the main reason you should think of upgrading. But otherwise, you probably don't need to upgrade. But if you're a professional photographer, well, you shouldn't be asking me that, you should know. You want to ask, should you get a new camera so that you've got another one as a backup? If you didn't have a backup camera, you shouldn't be doing professional photography, should you? Right, so what if you're a beginner photographer? I'm using the Panasonic GH series as an example because that's what I'm familiar with, but this basically applies to just about any camera model you want to go and buy there. Let's say, for example, you wanted to buy the latest Panasonic GH6. I don't have one here, this is just holding its place. Talking New Zealand dollars now, $3,000 for the latest GH6, and all the photographers are telling you if that's what you want to do, you want to go into videography as well, the GH6 is the camera you must have because it's that much better than the GH4 and the GH3 and everything before it. So let's say you're a beginner now who wants to make some money in photography or videography, and you go out and there's this GH6 for $3,000. Should you buy it? No. Well, I'll tell you how to make a small fortune in photography. You start with a large fortune, and you go out and buy everything that people say you should buy. You'll end up with a small fortune. Think about it this way. Each one of these cameras in its day was the best at its time that you had to get if you were serious about photography. All the way back to the GH1 and the GH2. The GH2 was a very highly regarded camera. But take that $3,000, buy this camera, the GH6, you've lost $500. Because if you go home, take that camera out of its box, and you put it on eBay, you'll get $2,500 for it. You've lost $500 just buying a new camera. In a year or two, it's going to be worth another $500 less. Actually, while I'm talking about that, I recently saw a GH6 for sale for $2,500, and I went and looked up the latest prices, and they've just dropped to $2,565. This guy doesn't want to sell it because he's no, it's worth it, it's new. But who's going to buy it for $2,500 when for another $65 you can buy a brand new camera? So that new camera you buy for $3,000, you lose $500 the first day, and within 6 months you've lost another $500. So what I'm suggesting, you go out, buy a 10-year-old Panasonic GH4, easily bought now for $500. You've just saved your first $2,500, which is not too much different from making your first $2,500. And if you're beginning, how long it's going to take you to make $2,500 anyway? And now you've got this 10-year-old camera. Some people will say to you, well, you should have bought something newer. But 10 years ago, people were saying, this is the camera you must buy. If we go back 20 years, take a Nikon D40 here. We had 4 megapixel and 6 megapixel cameras. The Nikon D2X came out at 12 megapixels. It did ISO 800, and that was a nasty, noisy ISO 800. You had to wear hearing protection. There was so much noise in the image. So back then, professionals were shooting with a Nikon D2X. That's 20 years ago. The GH4 is 10 years newer and better technology than that. It does ISO 25,600. So don't think that you have to get the absolute latest cameras that are out there. 20 years ago, wedding photographers were shooting with an 8 megapixel Canon 20D. 2 years later, some of them were saying, I wish I had waited for the Nikon D200. 10 megapixels. People were posting brag photos of ISO 3200 with the D200. It looks horrible compared to today's images, compared to the GH4, which goes to ISO 25,600. So there's no point buying the latest and greatest every time someone recommends it to you, because next year or the following year they're going to tell you your camera is now old and there's something else that's better out and it's a game changer. And are you going to upgrade every time you hear that word, a game changer or the latest technology? Because you're going to make a small fortune from your large fortune very quickly. If you have the money, you want to go out and buy the latest camera, go out and do it. See, it's your life, you're the one who has to live with the decisions. But also keep in mind another aspect of buying used cameras. You go and buy a camera for $400, you would think very carefully about spending $200 on a lens for that camera. And you will get a decent lens for $200. You'll get a second-hand 25mm 1.7 for $100, $150. But you buy a $3,000 camera, you don't think too much about spending $800 or $1,200 on a lens because it's that much cheaper than the camera. Like someone who goes out and buys a $50,000 car and needs $5,000 worth of work. So they think, oh well, what's $5,000 compared to $50,000? I may as well just suck it up and pay that and keep the car running. I go out and buy a $5,000 car. If it's going to need $2,000 worth of work, I'll sell it for $3,000 and I'll buy another $5,000 car. The person who bought the $50,000 car is paying $5,000 in interest. But psychologically, once you've bought that car, that expensive vehicle or camera, you don't think too much about spending a lot more money on lenses and other equipment. As I said, 20 years ago, there were 6-megapixel cameras. Back then, you could buy this camera for $1,200, and after a year, you could sell it for $900 because there weren't many other options out there. But these days, as cameras have progressed and become better and better, we've gone beyond the point where the image quality doubles every year or two, because that's what it was back then. You'd get a 6-megapixel camera that goes to ISO 1600, then another camera would go to 3200, another one to 6400. These days there's so many cameras out there that provide really good high ISO performance. You don't need to keep chasing the latest because these 10-year-old cameras can do the job really well, especially if you're a beginner. It's going to be a long time before you can find the full potential of that camera and want to move on. Here's another point. If you bought that camera for $500 instead of this one for $3,000, if after 1 year you think, no, I still really want that camera, it'll be $500 cheaper. Now you've got a camera for free because you've got the camera you wanted at the price you wanted with another camera, and you've got a backup camera. So that's another reason to buy secondhand when you're starting out. But there'll be people watching this video and plenty of other armchair experts that will still tell you you need to go and buy the latest. It's the last year's camera was good, but the latest is that much better. But the thing is, if they tell you you need to get a camera you can grow into, why couldn't you grow into the 10-year-old camera if you don't know much about photography? And there's still people who are advanced amateur photographers who still haven't grown into their cameras. This Nikon D40 here, 6 megapixels. I'll throw up some of the images I took with it. This camera got the best pictures I've ever had because I always had it next to me and I had a zoom lens on it on the car seat next to me, and whenever something appeared that I wanted to photograph, it was there. And I didn't worry too much about keeping it next to me because it was only the 6 megapixel camera. But this image behind me here, that's 6 megapixels. It's one of the sharpest photos I've ever taken. It was taken with Nikon D90, which is 12 megapixels, but it's heavily cropped down to 6 megapixels. That prints out really nicely at that size. If you think about it, print size is all about distance. People ask, but how big do you want to print? That 6 megapixel image would look great on a billboard because you'd stand further away and it would look this size when you're looking at it. You could take that 6 megapixel image, print it on the surface of the moon, and view it through a telescope. It's going to look exactly as sharp as that because of your viewing distance. So don't listen to people who say, well, you need so many megapixels to print this size and so many to print that size. I'll tell you a story about 15 years ago. I was in a shop and the compact cameras were all 4 megapixels back then and 5 megapixels. And they brought out one with 8 megapixels. And I heard the salesman saying to someone, no, look, your 4 megapixel camera is good if you want to print 6x4s, but if you want to print bigger, you'll need 8 megapixels. 1 year later, I heard him telling someone, Your 8 megapixel is good if you want to print 6x4s, but if you want to print bigger, you're going to need this 12 megapixel camera. It's never going to stop. People are always going to be telling you you need a bigger, better camera. One day there's going to be 100 megapixel sensors, and someone's going to buy the 101 megapixel sensor because it's got that much more. Meantime, most of us would do fine with 6 megapixels. Now, you still may not be convinced. It's easy for us to convince ourselves we need to buy new toys because we want to start something new. We want to make money out of our photography. We want to start a YouTube channel or something, and you think, well, this justifies me buying that. And we're going to go on these YouTube channels and we're going to look at the latest and greatest cameras, and they're going to tell you this is a game changer. This is the best thing that's ever happened. I'm buying 2 of them. These cameras are so good. This lens is my money lens. And most of these are clickbait titles just to get you to watch their videos because they make money out of you watching their videos. They're not going to say, well, I bought the latest, greatest camera or lens. Actually, I can't really tell much difference in my photos, but you should buy it anyway because they want to justify the time and money they've spent. And you'll find that someone who buys an f1.2 lens, it costs 5 times as much as a normal lens, they will convince themselves that that lens is superior because they don't want to go telling people, now, look, I wasted my money. I can't see the difference between this and a f1.8 lens. What about the title you often hear? This is my money-making lens. I take 95% of my photos with it. I couldn't live without this lens. And straight away you think, wow, I need to get a lens like that. I want to make money. Realistically, it may be their favorite focal length. Of course it's their money-making length if they take all their photos with it. If they took all their photos with their 18 to 55 kit lens, it would be their money-making lens. Or with a 24 to 70mm, that would be their money-making lens. I don't think that just because someone says it's a money-making lens, that if you buy it, you're going to make money out of it. And the funny thing is about all of these videos you see about the game changer, money-making lens, it's the best thing that's ever happened, best camera you could ever get. Next time you watch the video, they're promoting something else. So don't get sucked into these clickbait videos telling you to buy the latest gear. Keep in mind, though, that the digital world is forever changing. 20 years ago, people paid high money for second-hand camera bodies because there weren't many of them around, and people had to buy what they could get. At the moment, the market is really flooded. 95% of the listings I see for second-hand photography gear don't sell. And sometimes it takes people a few months before they realize, I need to just put this on $1 reserve and take what I can get, or I'm never going to get anything out of it. But I had previously promoted the 10-year rule, buy something 10 years old, but that has slowly crept up to less time because the GH6, that's $3,000, was preceded by the GH5, and this is a 7-year-old body. I just saw a GH5 sell for 675 New Zealand dollars. That's about 420, 430 US dollars. So I'm just about at the stage of promoting the 7-year rule now. And I imagine in 2 or 3 years, something 4 or 5 years old is going to sell for this much because the market is getting more and more flooded. And for every listing you see where someone says, I'm selling this because it's just sitting in a drawer collecting dust, there's another 100 of them sitting in someone else's cupboards or drawers that just haven't had the time to list yet. So be careful what you spend on new camera gear. If you've got the money, buy whatever makes you happy. But next week, I'm going to tell you about this amazing camera that's just come out. It's an absolute game changer. I'm going to buy 3 of them. It's got the best ISO, dynamic range, most megapixels that you could possibly want. And if you believe all of that, you haven't listened to a word that I've said, have you?